super spontaneous video. I just wanted to go through all of my readings for of 2022. My reading challenge was 20. Okay, sorry. To read 24 books, and I made it. I am with my Goodreads account. If you don't know what Goodreads is an amazing app that I've been using for 5 or more years to track all my readings. Sometimes I forget about this app, and I'm sure there's books that I read. Actually, I can only remember one that I've read that I didn't add here. Um, but yeah, super spontaneous video. I'm just going to go through all of my readings, and I have some books here. Some of the books that I will tell you guys I read on my Kindle, but I have a pile here. I'm not going to edit this video, so I'm sorry. You're just going to um, watch me talk for a while. The first book I've read this year, and it's been so long. Felt I thought that I read this book on 2021, but apparently it was the first book I've read of 2022. I rated 4 stars, and it's called Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. This is one of my C.S. Lewis is my favorite author. This book is about the four loves, and he talks about friendship. He talks about Eros love, which is like the romantic love. He talks about charity love, and he talks about affection. So he goes through all these four loves. This is a great book. Um, I have some marks here, and I would recommend everything from C.S. Lewis because he's just awesome. Love him. Um, the second book I've read, well, I can find it, but I have it on physical copy I borrowed from my cousin. It's called The Naked Truth About Sexuality. It's by Havilah Cunnington. Cunnington. Yeah, I remember that this was one of the first books that I've read this year. I rated 3 stars. Um, this book is good. It goes through like some of the principles of purity and sexuality in general. I don't really remember. The only thing I remember is that it wasn't like a super awesome book filled with new revelations. It was more of the same. And since it's a book, um, it's an English book, and it's by like a very specific context. Some things were very hard to relate because, for example, one thing that we don't do in Brazil is like purity rings. So when she was talking about that, since it's not common in our culture, not saying that we don't live a purity culture, but like purity rings, right? So anyways, just a bunch of things that I remember that I realized that it was very, very far, but not like related to principles, godly principles, scripture principles, but more like culture things that I couldn't relate personally, but it was nothing new, but not bad. So that was the second book that I read. Um, the third book is Nine Marks of a Healthy Church by Mark Dever. This book I read in English. Actually, I don't remember. I think I read in Portuguese. I read it on Kindle. I rated 4 stars. This book was really, really good for me to go through what I think about church, what is considered a healthy church. And this book helped me so much because this was the first year at my new church. So reading this book, I was so filled with gratitude and blessed by how my community is such a gospel-centered, biblical focus in community and a healthy church. Um, so when I was reading this book, it was like a confirmation of the place I am, and it was really good for me to have a really good heart. So I definitely recommend this book if you're struggling to understand what a healthy church is, or like how to, like if you're transitioning to churches and you're looking for a nice place, and what is considered a healthy church, what are the things that you should be looking for. Definitely recommend this book. And I remember that it wasn't really big. The fourth book I've read, I have it on physical copy. I have a physical copy. It's called Gamification. It's a Brazilian book on how to create learning experiences for kids. Not for kids, but like I used for kids that engage kids. So I'm reading the Goodreads rating that I gave this book, and I gave it 3. It was very helpful for my work. It has a bunch of frameworks that I really did use, so thankful for this book. If you're interested in this, it was a great read, but it's in Portuguese. So fifth book is Make Time. I don't know the proper translation, but it's by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky. They are the authors of the Sprint book that talks about the Sprint methodology. Not life-changing, but it does bring, if you're struggling with, I wouldn't recommend this book specifically. If you're struggling with finding time, I think there are better books about it. But the main thing is like, just do one thing at a time. And I feel like there's a bunch of books that go through these perspective, and this is one more of them. Like, it has other things too, of course, but I think one of the things that it really got stuck in me, like in my life, was this perspective. And I think, again, like this is something very cultural, like in the US, in this context that he's talking about. Like there is a bunch of people really focusing and making the most out of the time that they have, and it's very startup like, and I don't think it applies to a bunch of people in Brazil. So I wouldn't recommend this book for Brazilians. I would recommend if you work with tech and you want to have a perspective of your time. But if you're a Christian, I wouldn't recommend this book about time. Like there's better Christian books about time. Anyways, sorry, I'm going through all of this fast because there's a lot of things there's a lot of books. Okay, the 6th book, I think, is called Foreign to Familiar, A Guide to Understanding Hot and Cold Climate Cultures. This book I rated 5 stars. This was the first book that I've read with my boyfriend, Michael. This book is really, really good. It was definitely recommend this book for people who are dating someone from abroad, or they're going to live in a different country, because it really does help to understand where we're coming from and how to deal with differences in cultures. And sister was here. So definitely a very, very sharp book, like you can read in a day. It was super helpful for us. It was recommended by our friend Hannah. This book is written by a missionary called Sarah Lanier. I think she's from YWAM. I'm not really sure, but like it's not specifically Christian content, but she's a missionary. That's why like she went to a bunch of different countries and had a lot of insights. Really good book. So the next one, 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. I've read this book before, but I've read with my boyfriend again, and I rated 4 stars. Since I've read it before, it was not life-changing because I already knew what it was, but I think this is one of the things that is helpful, but also you don't have to be really obsessed over it, because some people are like 2 or 3 and they don't fit the perfect box. But great book, and just looking at all these books that I've read with my boyfriend is kind of nice. Yeah. So, seventh book, I think, is A Good Start by Charles Spurgeon. This book, I got it in Washington, D.C. at a bookstore, old bookstore. And I didn't know that I was going to like it that much. I've never, like before getting this book, I didn't know this book existed. So it was really nice reading this, having no idea of helicopter, having no idea of what to expect. And this book is just a bunch of advices and scripture-based stories and insights that Spurgeon wanted to say to young women and men. And there's a bunch of advices for young women and men Christian books. Like there is a lot of content related to that. And even though he's from a couple centuries, I don't know when this book was written. Let me see. 1898, first time it was published. So even though like it was a long time ago, there is a bunch of valuable things, and sometimes he's really ahead of time, you know, like there's modern contemporary books that are not that ahead of time, and they have a little bit of a struggle expressing themselves and their ideas. But this book is a gem. Rated 4 stars, and I really loved it. There's chapters about like specific stories in the Bible, and there's usually it's a mix, like one chapter about something that he would tell a man and something that he would tell a girl, and some things that he will tell anyone that is really that's young. Of course, like there's things that are really much more specific to his specific context, like London, that century, but it's still a great book. Like if you look, there's some really good insights. I love this book. I love his writing. He's really specific about his writing, and I really, really love Spurgeon. And it was also like, I think my first book that I've read, like not a devotional of him. Okay, next I have The Hobbit, rated 5 stars. This book is life-changing, and I want to be the Lord of the Rings fan, and I'm getting there, but this was the start. And I've had this book for a while, and I finally read it, and it was so much fun reading this book. And this is awesome. Like if you like fantasies, or I don't know, if you're just a human being, read this book, please. It's amazing. Anyways, 5 stars. Okay, so I have 2 books that are really, really special for me. And this author became one of my favorite authors. I read her for the first time this year, very much influenced by the women that I really, really admire in faith, and they always point to her. And I will rate all of my readings by the end of this talk, but Elizabeth Elliot, she is just amazing, and she was a very important woman to Christian women, and she has a beautiful story, and she made a lot of books that are very, very sweet and just a blessing. This book is Passion and Purity, and this book is Let Me Be a Woman. Let Me Be a Woman is a bunch of letters that she wrote for her kid before she got married, her daughter. And Passion and Purity is a bunch of letters and insights that she sent some people, but she gathered in a book. And also a little bit of her story with her first husband, Jim Elliot, which was who was very important to Christian life. Definitely check their lives, and if you're a girl, you should read this. I think this book, Passion and Purity, even though it has a pretty girly um, cover, if you look at the ratings, there's a bunch of guys that read this book and it was blessed, and I believe in that. Like, you can read this book and still be blessed, because it talks about how purity is not what you do, but it's also much more a state of heart. And of course, it talks about sex, it talks about intimacy, it brings these topics, but it's so much more than that. And that's what I love about her. She brings this perspective of Christ all the time, and how like she found so much joy even though she went through a bunch of really hard things as a woman, as a wife. Really good books. Love her. She became one of my favorite authors. And I've also read other book about her, but keep going because I will get there. Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. So this book I rated 3 stars. I read this book with Michael's sister, Lena, who I really, really love. And I hated the beginning of this book. It's very popular. It had recently, like, they launched a movie of this book this year. I really, really hated the beginning of this book. Like, I was not feeling it. I almost stopped reading. I'm not that much of a fan of romance anymore, but it was a nice book. Like, it was good. When I rate 3 stars, because the book was good. But it's not like my all-time favorite of one of the best books I've read. But it's a Christian story based on Hosea. It's not like a little, you can't really compare it to the Bible story because the Bible has a different context to it, but it's really good. Okay, next is, well, it's in Portuguese, but I'm going to translate. It's called Casal Imperfeito, which means imperfect couple, by a very famous Brazilian author, contemporary. Her name is Fernanda Witwicki. And yeah, it was a great book. She gathered a bunch of insights and things that really blessed her relationship and marriage. And like the topics of this book are like, if you feel like, she talks about purity, men, intimacy, identity, the power of communication, when they're kids. Anyways, it's just I think she gathered all the things that she learned in marriage, like the most important things, and it gathered in a book. This is not only for people that are married. It was a great book. I rated 4 stars. I think it gathers just a bunch of things, but it's not like the best book I've read about. Okay, sorry about that. It's not the best book I've read, but I would recommend. Like, it's a nice book and it blessed me. And there are some like work parts, like worksheets and things for you to answer. And I think there's a workbook too, but I didn't get because yeah, there's like questions and things that you can work on with your partner, but I didn't do all of them, but I did discuss with Michael some of them. So yeah, rated 4 stars. And okay, the next book I rated 5 stars, and is Suffering is Never in Vain, or Suffering is Never for Nothing, by Elizabeth Elliot. You can really see. I don't know why it keeps showing you. You can't really see. Okay. Yeah. This book is very, very short, from the same author of the 2 other books that I've showed you. And she went through a lot of things in her life that were really, really hard. So she wrote a book about the main points of suffering and how she dealt with it. I think every Christian should read this book. It is a great book. She gathers also like a bunch of different authors perspectives. So there, I remember that there was C.S. Lewis quotes and a bunch of references, and it's a short book. And if you're facing a hardship in your life, I would recommend this book if you want to have a nice perspective to it. Um, Next book is Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. I have the Portuguese copy of it, and I rated 3 stars. It's a good book. I've read with Michael, and it talks about physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, spiritual boundaries. I think there is an overall really good idea of this, and if you have been to therapy, you're kind of familiar with this boundaries theme. And I think it's important to think about this, but there's a bunch of Christian books like this that they want to prove a point and they go to the extreme of it, and it seems like they're reading the whole Bible in this perspective. But it's okay because he's the author of the book and he's trying to defend his idea and argument. But I think there was also some verses that they were taken out of context that it bothered me a little bit. Overall, it's not terrible, but I think you should read with wisdom. I wouldn't take to the extreme that the author took. So if you're kind of like, if you read a book and you get really like passionate and obsessive about implementing that in your life, I think this book you should like, don't do that with this book because there's gray areas to this, and I don't believe that one book can have all the answers of your life unless it's the Bible. So this is not the Bible, but it still gives you very, very good tools in some perspectives. And yeah, it's not terrible. I rated 3 stars. Honestly, it's more of like a 2.5, but okay. Next, I read it on Kindle. It's in Portuguese. It's called 40 Finance Habits for a Better Life by Billy Imperial. I rated 2 stars. It was nothing new. I remember that this book was very, very short. I just read it to get like advices on finances, and I think I made a list of all the things that I've learned with it, and there were like 15 topics, very short, and I shared on a server, I think. But anyways, not the best, wouldn't recommend. Next one is Burn Your Portfolio, Stuff They Don't Teach You in Design School but shoot. Okay, every designer should read this book. It's by Michael Janda. Again, it's not completely applicable to Brazil, but there is some really good insights, and it brings you a large perspective of the market of design. So I think this is a pretty good book. And if you're a designer or like work as with an agency, or if you're creative, read this book. It's good. But again, it's not applicable to most Brazilian environments, I would say. Okay, I think this is like top 3 best books. Giving you a spoiler already. It's called Stepping Heavenward by Elizabeth Payson Prentice. And this book, was recommended by Elizabeth Elliot, the other author that I was talking about. And this book is amazing. Like, it was really life-changing, and I've read it so fast because it was so good that I think I should read again. And how could I describe this book? I don't know what's your idea when I say like, oh, this book is really, really good. But some people have different standards than I do. This is an old book. At like disclaimers of this book. This book is an old book. It brings a lot of like girl-related topics. It's more of like a book for young girls, but it brings so much good insight of a Christian life. And I've read this book because Elizabeth Elliot recommended it. It was one of her favorite books, but also because one of my favorite booktubers, she said that this book was like, the theme of it was like good girls still need Jesus. So there is this girl, she's a good girl, and you see all of her life. It's like journals, her diary. You're reading through her lifetime diary, and she goes through a bunch of different things, and you basically see sanctification happening in her life, her hearts towards her family and suffering, and she goes through a lot of losses and grief a lot of times in her life because it was a different time that people got very easily sick. But it is such a nice book. Like, it just bring this like, hey, this is Christian life. We are all growing, and it's a lifetime process. Of course, God can like, change us, and He did when we had an encounter with Jesus. But there's a lot of things that take time, and this book is very much about process, and I really loved it. It was really important for me when I was reading it. This book is amazing. Stepping Heavenward by Elizabeth Prentice. Okay, also one of the best books I've read, and I have one person that I really want to give this book because it's like very much their style. It's called The Wisdom Pyramid, Feeding Your Soul in a Post-Truth World by Brett McCracken. This book is really, really good. And this is a book that he's trying to prove a point, like this book that I've showed you, like the Boundaries book. But he goes to the amazing, really good side. And in a sense of like, of course, he's using a framework of like, oh, this is how there's a pyramid, just like there's a nutrition pyramid of the things that you should eat, that you should feed your soul, a priority. But that's really important. Like, this is not something that you can like, oh, he's just putting order in things. Of course, you don't have to be obsessive over it, but it's like he's saying the truth. We should feed our souls with the Word of God primarily. And he gives an order, and he goes through all of these things, and he put, of course, at last, social media, which is accurate. So this book is theologically really good. He goes deep in scripture references. It's such a good book. Like, one of the best contemporary themed theological books that I've read. And it's really hard to find these kind of books. But other book that it's kind of like contemporary themes too. But it's also really, really good, and one of the best books I've read this year. It's The Liturgy of the Ordinary. And every time I'm talking about this book, I say, like, this book is very, very much my personal theology, like one of the books that I consider my personal theology. One of the things that I consider mine, like, oh, this is really close to my heart, and it's about finding God in your daily life. And I love this book. I really, really did. And she comes from a different background, and I think she's Anglican. She's from Anglican church, if I'm not mistaken. But this book is amazing. And I rated 4 stars, but it was almost like a 4. It was almost like 5, like 4.5. And I think every Christian should read this book too. And okay, next book, I also have a physical copy. It's called The Meaning of Marriage. I've read with Michael. Best book I've ever read about relationships. That's it. 5 stars. Best book I've read about Christian relationships. You should read this book. It's by Timothy Keller and his wife, and it was really important for us to read this book. That's it. I'm not going to say much more than that. Also, one of the best books I've read this year Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. The Trinity is not something that we can push and forget about, like, for, like, just hide. It's something that we need to understand as Christians, because it's one of the core things about our faith. Is the Trinity. So this book is really, really good, and I love reading it. I really want to read it again. This is how it looks like. I've rated 4 stars, but again, one of the best books I've read this year. And it's called Delighting the Trinity, An Introduction to Christian Faith. Very short book. Like, I think my time, the time that they gave me, like, oh, you're going to finish this book, it was like 2 hours. I didn't finish in 2 hours because it's a little bit dense, but it's really good. Best book I've read about Trinity, and I think a lot of people say the same. Like, it's really, really good. If you want to learn about the Trinity, go read this book. Next book, What God Says About Women by Kathleen Nielsen. I also read this book on Kindle. Rated 4 stars, really, really good. I'm kind of like I've read a lot of books about women ministry in Christian perspective, biblical perspective, so a bunch of things weren't new to me, but it's really good. So definitely recommend if you want to start reading this book, reading about this topic. If you're Brazilian, there's a book that I would recommend instead, but if you're American or if you're European, start with this book because it's in English and it's really good. I've read close to the end of the year. And my last read, that wasn't my last read, but in the order, like, there were other books that I will show you that I've read that I didn't put here on this list. But it's Bem Sei Que Tudo Podes, and this is a Portuguese only book. It's by one of my biggest inspiration in ministry, and like I love her. She's the only person that I really like following on Instagram at this point, and I think I only have Instagram to see her stuff. She is a Brazilian. She lives in the US. She wrote this book about kind of her story, her love story, but not it's not her love story, but there's like some pieces of it, and it is a good book. I don't like romances anymore, but I rated 4 stars, but I would rate 3. The story is not that good, but it's like, not that it's bad, but it's a common story. But I love her, so I like the book because of her. I'll be honest. I just think that she's amazing. But yeah, also other books that I've read that I didn't put there. I've read this 12 Extraordinary Women by John MacArthur. I used to help me for the church small group, and it's a really good book, and I wouldn't recommend actually. I don't like, it's written by a very specific person on the Reformed world. Things that he taught, like all the things that he says are biblical, as I can remember, but I wouldn't highlight some of the things that he did. And it's a man writing a book about women. So, like, for example, just a silly example, but Sarah, like, her chapter is basically talking about Abraham, the whole chapter. So, if you're building a library of women's studies, maybe you can come across this book, but there are better books, but it's not bad. It's just that, like, it's John MacArthur. He's very specific about his opinions. So yeah. And one book that I didn't read everything because it was my devotional book, New Morning Mercies by Paul Tripp. And my cover is disgusting. Also, a bunch of friends a bunch of like friends that I have, they were also reading this book as their devotional. It's a 1-year devotional, and it's all based in the Gospels. Is really good. I really, really enjoy it. I wished I've read it more, but I think around September I was a little bit tired of it. But I really like Paul Tripp. I want to read more of his books. And that's it. These are the books that I've read on 2022. And the best books are Delighting in the Trinity, Meaning of Marriage, Liturgy of the Ordinary, The Wisdom Pyramid, Stepping Heavenward, Suffering is Never for Nothing, The Hobbit, and The Four Loves. These were my favorite readings of 2022. And yeah, thanks for watching me. And I will get back to you with my other list of books. Bye.